Alright guys, welcome to Math 95. We're going to be working in Chapter 6 today, so 6.1. We're going to be looking at the greatest common factor and factoring by grouping. Factoring is a huge concept in Math 95, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to define what factoring is. Whenever you factor, you break into numbers that can be multiplied together to get the original number. Okay, so that's what it means to factor. It's just to break up. Okay, so we're going to be finding the GCF today, and we're going to be finding how to factor by grouping. So, define the greatest common factor, or the GCF, that's what we call it. First step is to factor, then you list your common factors, you choose your least exponent, and you multiply. So whenever you factor, you have to write out each number in primed factored form. And primed is just a really important number, important number. It means that it's only divisible by 1 in itself. So some examples of prime numbers are going to be 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23, 29, and 31. There are more prime numbers than this, but that's about as far as you need to get going with it. So if I'm looking at 2, the only factors that I have of 2 are 1 times 2 to get me to 2. And that's the same for each one of these prime numbers. So the first thing that we do is we factor. Now I want you to use this thing called a factor tree whenever you're dealing with whole numbers to get the primed factored form. Step 2 is you're going to list the common factors. So you list each prime number or each variable that is factored of every term on the list. Step 3 is you're going to choose the least exponent. So you use the exponent on common prime factored, the least exponent from the prime factored forms. I promise I'll show you what that means in just a second. It makes a lot more sense when you're dealing with variables because we're dealing with the least or the smallest exponent. And then the last thing we have to do is we have to multiply the primes, and this should be from step 3. Okay, so you factor, you list the common factors, you choose the least exponent, and then you multiply them all together. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the GCF for each list of numbers. So I've got 24 and I've got 36. So the first thing I have to do is I have to factor it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the factor tree to do this. So I'm going to write out 24 and I'm going to write out 36. Now if I look at 24, I know if I use the factor tree that it is an even number, so it will be divisible by 2. And 24 divided by 2 will give me 12. 12 is still an even number, so I can divide it by 2. And 12 divided by 2 will give me 6. And then 6 is also even, so I can divide it by 2. And 6 divided by 2 will give me 3. The way that you know that you're done with your factor tree is that you get to a prime number. Alright, so let's do it with 36. 36 is even, so that's 2 and 18. Then for 18, it's going to be 2 and 9. And then for 9, it's going to be 3 and 3. So I know that I'm finished because I have all primed numbers. So that's step 1. Step 2 is we have to list the common factors. So what I do is I write out 24 equals, and then I write down my prime numbers, 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And then for 36, it is 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. Step 3 is we have to choose the least exponents. So what that really means is we're just choosing what's in common. So I see that I have a group of 2 in both of them. I have another group of 2, and then I have one group of 3. So what I have to do with these numbers in my step 4 is I have to multiply them. So for my GCF, I take my first group of 2 times 3, and 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12. So my GCF is going to be 12 when I'm looking at 24 and 36. Alright, if I'm looking at 16R to the 9th, 10R to the 15th, and 8R to the 12th, the first thing I need to do is I need to take these whole numbers and I need to use a factor tree. So for 16, it's even, so I'd go 2 and 8. 8 is even, so 2 and 4, and then 4 would be 2 and 2. For 10, you're going to have 2 and 5, and for 8, it's going to break up to be 2 and 4, and then 2 and 2. Remember, the way that you know that you're done with your factor tree is that you get all prime numbers. So for 16, it's going to be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. For 10, it's going to be 2 times 5. For 8, it's going to be 2 times 2 times 2. Alright? So the next thing I have to do is I have to choose the least exponent. So I'm trying to see what they have all together. And that would be a group of 2's. So for my GCF, the only whole number that I can write is 2 down, because there's no other group in common for each one of the terms. Now, I'm not done yet because I still have the variables to look at. So I've got R to the 9th, R to the 15th, and R to the 12th. So again, I'm trying to choose that least exponent or the smallest exponent, which would be R to the 9th. And then I found my GCF. Now the whole purpose of finding your GCF is so you can pull it out of some type of polynomial. It could be a binomial, it could be a trinomial, which binomial is 2 terms, trinomial is 3 terms, but it's really important that you be able to identify what your GCF is. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to be factoring out the GCF. So we write in factored form by factoring out the GCF. So I have 6x to the 4th plus 12x squared. So what I see is I see 2 terms, so I have a binomial. And what I have to do is I have to figure out what that GCF is so I can pull it out of each term. So what their greatest common factor is. So again, I'm going to do my factor tree of 6, which will be 2 and 3. And then I'm going to do my factor tree of 12, which would be 2 and 6, and then 2 and 3. Next, I'm going to list them out. So I got 6, which is 2 times 3, and 12, which is 2 times 2 times 3. And then I look at my groups. I got a group of 2's and I got a group of 3's. So for my GCF, I go 2 times 3, which would be 6. And then I look at my exponents. I've got x to the 4th and x to the 2nd. I'm choosing the least exponent, so my smallest exponent, which would be x squared. And that's my GCF. So when I factor out my GCF, what I want to do is I first want to write my GCF, 6x squared, and then I'm going to write my binomial after I reduce it out. So typically what we're doing is, well, what you did in 94, it would be you would multiply it in. The opposite of multiplication is division. So for my side work, to be able to figure out what I put for my binomials, I'm going to take my first term of 6x to the 4th and I'm going to divide it by my GCF. So when I am using division, any number that's on top of itself will simplify to 1, and then my exponents I'm going to have to subtract. So 4 minus 2 would be x squared. So all I'm going to be left with for my first term is x squared. For my second term, I take 12x squared and I divide it by my GCF. You will always divide it by your GCF. And 12 divided by 6 is 2, and then anything over itself reduces down to 1, so plus 2. So I still have my binomial, but I pulled out my GCF, and that is the factored form. Okay, so now I've got 30t to the 6th plus 25t squared plus 10t to the 4th. So first thing I have to do is I have to figure out what my GCF is. So I've got to find the factors of 30, 25, and 10. For 30, it's even, so 2 and 15. And then 15 will break down to 3 and 5. These are all prime numbers, so I know that I'm done. For 25, the factors are 5 times 5, which both of those are prime numbers, so I'm done with that one. And then for 10, just like we did before, it's going to be 2 and 5. and they're prime numbers. So if I list them out for 30, it'd be 2 times 3 times 5. For 25, it would be 5 times 5, and for 10, it's going to be 2 times 5. Okay, so I look at my groups, and the only thing that I have in common is a 5. So my GCF is going to be a 5, but I still have to deal with my exponents. So I've got t to the 6th, t to the 4th, and t to the 5th, and t to the 4th. So I'm going to use this t to the 4th, and that's going to be my GCF. Now, I have 3 terms, so it's going to be a trinomial. So what I want to do is I want to put equal signs, and I want to put my GCF, which is 5t to the 4th, and I'm still going to have some type of trinomial. In order to figure out what I put in here, I go ahead and I do my side work, and I take each term, so I take 30t to the 6th, and I divide it by my GCF, which would be 5t to the 4th. 30 divided by 5 would be 6. 6 minus 4 would be 2. So my first term is going to change to 6t to the 2nd. Now for my next one, I'm going to take 25t to the 5th, and I'm going to divide it by 5t to the 4th. 25 divided by 5 is going to be 5. 5 minus 4 is just going to be 1. So plus 5t. And then I'm going to take 10t to the 4th, and I'm going to divide it by 5t to the 4th. 10 divided by 5 is going to be 2. And then any number over itself will cancel out, so I'd go plus 2. And I'm done. We are going to be doing a lot of factoring out your GCF in chapter 6, so please make sure that you get comfortable with this. Now the next step of the factoring is factoring by grouping. This is my favorite because you can kind of check yourself as you're going. So when a polynomial has 4 terms, common factors can sometimes be used to factor by grouping. So whenever you see 4 terms, you want to think factor by grouping. So the first step that you do is you group the terms, collect the terms into 2 groups so that the groups have a common factor. So what you do is just put parentheses around your 4 terms. Then step 2 is you factor out within your groups. So factor out the greatest common factor within each group. So you're going to have a GCF of the first binomial plus a GCF of the second binomial. Then step 3 is factor the entire polynomial. So you factor out the common binomial factored from the results of step 2. So this is why it's my favorite part, or favorite process, is because this number, or this binomial should equal that binomial. We call them common binomials, but this is how you know that you have it absolutely right. So factoring by grouping, you have 4 terms. First thing you do is you group the 2 terms, then you pull out your GCF, and then you look for your common binomial. So let's make it real. So we've got PQ plus 5Q plus 2P plus 10. So I see that I have 4 terms. So the first thing I have to do is I have to group them, and I group them by parentheses. The next thing I have to do is I'm going to look at this group and I'm going to try to pull out my GCF. So my greatest common factor. I have PQ plus 5Q. The only thing I have in common is the Q. So now I've got to figure out what's going to be in that binomial. So I have my side work. I do want you to show this. So you take your first term of PQ and you divide it by Q. So you're going to just be left with a P. Then I'm going to take 5Q and I'm going to divide it by Q. Q over Q will cancel, just leaving me with 5. So I got P plus 5. Alright, over here I've got 2P plus 10. The only thing that they have in common is a 2. So with my side work here, I would take 2P divided by 2 and be left with P. And then 10 divided by 2 would leave me with 5 plus 5. Alright, now this is where we kind of check to see, and my common binomial is P plus 5, and I got P plus 5, so I know I'm on the right track. So I go P plus 5 times Q plus 2, and then I box my answer. So I'm using my GCF that I've been finding, but this process I think is pretty, you can check it as you go, so I think it's pretty easy. Alright, so next one we have is 2xy plus 3y plus 2x plus 3. So I see that I have four groups, or four terms, so my only option is factor by grouping. So I group the first two, I group the second two, then what I have to do is I have to pull out. So I have to pull out the GCF, so I have 2xy plus 3y. The only thing that I have in common with this and my first binomial is just a y. So for my side work, I take my first term, which is 2xy, and I divide it by y. The y's cancel, leaving me with 2x. And then I have 3y divided by y, which will leave me with 3, so 2x plus 3. In my second group, we got 2x plus 3. 2 and 3 are prime numbers, and there's no x in the second term, so the only thing that I can pull out is a 1. And it's going to be super important that you pull out that 1 if they have nothing in common, because it's going to make a difference at the end. Okay, so I've factored out my GCFs. Now what I've got to do is I've got to check the common binomials. These are going to be exactly the same, so I'm going to write 2x plus 3, and then I'm going to go y plus 1, and I'm going to box my answer. If you forget to pull out this 1, it's going to mess up your problem right here, because it's just going to look like your GCF is y, which is y plus 1. Alright, so next one, we have 2a squared minus 4a plus 3ab minus 6b. First thing I see is I have four terms. Whenever I have four terms, I group the first two, I group the second two, and then I look for my GCF. So I got 2a squared minus 4a. So my GCF is going to be 2a. And now I have to find what my binomial is going to be on the inside now. So I take the 2a squared, divide it by 2a. The 2's will cancel out, and then 2 minus 1 just leaves me with 1. So I've got a. Then I got 4a minus 2a. 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2, and the a's cancel out, so I go plus. Nope. This is something that sometimes I forget to write. See how it's the minus 4a? Make sure you carry that minus over. So instead of it being plus, it should be minus 2. That's going to be something that's super important. Alright, so then we have 3ab minus 6b. So I definitely see that I have a b in common and a 3. So I go plus 3b. With my side work, I take 3ab, I divide it by 3b. The 3's cancel, the b's cancel, I'm left with a. Then I take negative 6b divided by 3b. Negative divided by a positive is a negative. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and my b's cancel, so minus 2. These are going to be exactly the same, so a minus 2 times 2a plus 3b, because I bring my GCFs over, and then I box my answer. Okay, here's the last one. So we have 18r squared plus 12ry minus 3xr minus 2xy. So I see I have four terms. My only option is factor by grouping. I group the first two and I group the second two. Now this is super important. If you have a negative in front of the third term, you want to include that negative inside of your second group, and then you're going to put a little plus right up here. So I've got 18r squared plus 12ry. I definitely see that I can pull out an r, and I can also pull out a 6. So for my side work, you go 18r squared divided by 6r. 18 divided by 6 is going to leave me with 3. 2 minus 1 is just 1, so I've got 3r. Now I've got 12ry divided by 6r. 12 divided by 6 is going to be 2. My r's cancel out, so I'm just left with a y. So plus 2y. Alright, now, right here I've got negative 3xr minus 2xy. So I know I can definitely pull out an x, but because my third term is negative, I've got to pull out a negative x. So to find out my side work, I take negative 3xr divided by negative x. X's cancel, negative over negative cancels, and I'm left with a positive 3r. Then I take negative 2xy, divide it by negative x. My negatives cancel, my x's cancel, and I'm left with 2y plus 2y. I look for my common binomial, I have that, so I have 3r plus 2y. And then I multiply it by my GCF, so 6r minus x. And I'm done. Alright guys, so what I need for you to do now is I need you to do your 6.1 homework. Please make sure that you show all work and come in having questions. Thank you.